Okay, so we're going to go ahead and have Michelle introduce our speaker tonight.
So excited for this one. I really
Yeah.
Super, super excited to have Domenic Priore. Am I pronouncing it right, Domenic?
Yeah.
Yeah, kind of. Priore.
Hey.
Who is an author, music historian, and television producer whose focus is on popular music and youth culture. He has written extensively about music, including the Beach Boys' Smile album, and contributed to the Smile Sessions compilation. He's currently the primary writer and creative consultant on the AMC Hollywood Rocks the Movies documentaries. And I actually just ordered his book on Amazon and got it yesterday.
Wow, yay.
Riot on the Sunset Strip. I can't wait to read it. I was hoping to read it before this, but that was a little ambitious. So I'll catch up with you later on that.
All right, cool.
Super excited to have you here, though. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Michelle and Jamie.
Yeah. Oh, and one last thing, everybody. We have me on drums, aka PowerPoint, Michelle on lead guitar, aka DJ, and Domenic on vocals, aka the presenter. So thank you in advance for having patience with us as we juggle screens, switch screens, play audio, fade in and out. We're going to get you your content, but thank you if it takes an extra few seconds.
All right.
Having said that, I'm going to go ahead and let Domenic take it away.
All right. So the South Bay surf music scene pretty much came out of nowhere. The two elements that got mixed up to create it were a combination of wood surfboards from the early 1950s going away in favor of the lighter polyurethane boards that became the standard by the late 1950s. This made it easier for teenagers to handle surfboards. Then, a trend in rock and roll instrumental records came about in 1958 because that was the year that both Duane Eddy and Link Wray released their first hit records. The summer of '58 also saw the Champs' Tequila hit #1 for weeks. 1959 in particular saw a slew of rock and roll instrumental bands all over America hitting Billboard's Hot 100 chart. The Fireballs from New Mexico and the Ventures from Seattle area released their first records that year. Both emphasized guitars only, breaking away from the previous emphasis on saxophone as the primary instrument. In 1960, two records from California started to buzz locally: Moondog by Hollywood's The Gamblers and Church Key by San Luis Obispo's The Revels. These set the stage for a 1961 rock and roll instrumental explosion in the greater Los Angeles area. The first organic group of teenagers to go in this direction from the South Bay were the Journeymen, comprised of guitarists Lonnie Fredericks and Art Fisher, drummer Roger Pearsall, bass player Jeff Lungen, and saxophonist Don Schreier. These guys didn't get out to record until other local bands had already instigated a surfing trend, quote unquote, but you can hear from this record, Surfer's Blues, that they were really rooted in a more traditional blues style that rock and roll was based on. Lonnie Fredericks' favorite player was the R&B instrumental guitarist from Dallas, Freddie King, and you can hear how the Journeymen nicked Freddie's San Jose on this number, Surfer's Blues. Now, the Journeymen were in no way, shape, or form surfers, nor were they really playing for a surfer audience when they started in 1959. By definition, the guys in the band would have been considered hodads, greasers who played at car club dances and the like. That was a tougher crowd, prone to fights and a bit more influenced by the East Coast juvenile delinquent tone that early rock and roll had become notorious for. It did give the basis of the South Bay surf music sound that overall tough edge. The notorious aspect began to change in Southern California with the surfer crowd, who favored a more bohemian kind of lifestyle based on the many Beat Generation coffee houses that dotted the beach areas of the greater Los Angeles area during the 60s. In Malibu, there was Positano's, Venice had the Gas House and Venice West. Hermosa Beach had not only the Lighthouse Jazz Club, but the Insomniac Cafe across the street as well. In Seal Beach, there was the Rouge et Noir. Huntington had the Golden Bear. Newport people flocked to Sid's Blue Beat, and in Laguna, you had Cafe Frankenstein. Not only did the bohemian vibe infiltrate the surf character of that time, these venues often featured flamenco guitar players. That sound would really begin to appear in surf music because the early surfing movies of Bud Brown, John Severson, and Bruce Brown would feature flamenco music in the Mexico scenes of their movies, so it was all a natural fit. In early 1961, a group of high school kids from Westchester had one of the earliest breakthrough national hits, later identified as surf music. guitarists Dennis Farley and Jim Young, saxophonists Ray Sullivan and Larry Barton, pianist Larry Winook, drummer Michael Anderson, and Frank DeLuna, who played the gyro, called themselves the Frogmen. Their first single, Underwater, was a saxophone-driven stomper, a sound that would become ubiquitous on LA radio during the first half of the 60s. The central guitar line, however, would in 1968 be taken by Brian Wilson as the main chorus for the Beach Boys' Do It Again. The Frogmen made another great single called Tioga, but alas, it was time to go to college. Since their label Candix had ripped them off the money made from Underwater, their parents told them, see? And had the boys give up rock and roll for a more sound collegiate direction. Their producer, Joe Saraceno, however, took the Frogmen's basic tonality and duplicated it by the end of the year for another national hit, SURFER'S Stomp, as the Marquettes. In reality, this was a group of mostly black Hollywood studio musicians, including jazz saxophonist Plage Johnson, who also played on the Little Richard records recorded in LA during the 1950s. The Marquettes became a rotating session crew with a separate touring band, and Saraceno wound up recording 3 albums as the Marquettes during the 1960s, with the other big national hit being Out of Limits. The real foundation of the South Bay surf music scene lies in the formation of a bunch of 15-year-olds from the Redondo Beach, Palos Verdes area known as the Bel Airs. This is another group who never got past recording 3 45s during the 60s. Their individual members would splinter to make up the Challengers, drummer Richard Delvey, pianist Jim Roberts, and guitarist Art Fisher, Eddie and the Showmen, lead guitarist Eddie Bertrand, second drummer Dickie Dodd, PJ and the Galaxies, guitarist and songwriter Paul Johnson, and the Standells, 60s garage rock legends who Dickie Dodd became the lead singer and the drummer for. Chaz Stewart was the Bel Airs beatnik saxophonist, and future Challengers member Art Fisher would be the new lead guitarist for the Bel Airs when Eddie Bertrand left to form Eddie and the Showmen. This talented bunch of guys started out in early 1961 by recording what became one of the top surf records ever done, Mr. MOTO. Mr. MOTO finally broke in the fall, reaching the top 20 on the #1 rock and roll radio station chart at the time in LA, KFWB. The record got some airplay in New York, but really settled in as one of the most covered surf music records around the world. It was one of the 4 songs that really broke surf music internationally. From September to fall of 1961, the Bel Airs' Mr. MOTO coexisted on the KFWB chart with Dick Dale's first surf music release, Let's Go Trippin', his only disc to hit the Billboard Hot 100. And also on the charts at that time in KFWB was the Marquette's SURFER'S Stomp, and this, the Beach Boys' Surfin'. So you can imagine the impact Surfin', Mr. MOTO, Let's Go Trippin', and SURFER'S Stomp had, all being on the charts at the same time during the fall of 1961 in LA on KFWB. Within a year, movie studios would begin to cash in on the surf music craze. People all over America would hear about the subculture that was called surfing, and new records and dances would become part of the scene. From Hawthorne, the Beach Boys' first record showed them at the beginning to be more of a stand-up 1950s vocal group backed by other musicians. But that did not go down well when the group debuted at the Rendezvous Ballroom, opening for Dick Dale in Balboa. So Brian Wilson got right on the ball and started to rehearse with his brothers Carl Wilson on guitar, Dennis Wilson on drums, their neighbor David Marks on rhythm guitar. He was later replaced by Al Jardine. And the Wilson brothers' cousin Mike Love on lead vocals and saxophone. And we have a little quote here from Dean Torrence about some of the early Beach Boys days. Let's kind of hear that.
Dean, do you happen to remember when there was, I guess, the lore and the legend, but it's never been written down where, that I guess the Beach Boys were performing at a gig and you, Jan and Dean, were the headliners, and you guys ran out of songs, or somebody ran out of songs, so you played their Beach Boys songs, and that's how the collaboration began. Do you happen to remember where that took place and how it all kind of came down?
It was some South Bay High School, which was relatively close to where they were from, as I remember, because they had a whole lot of fans there. I kind of want to say Hermosa Beach, rings a bell, but I'm not sure, and of course they don't remember. But it was just a high school auditorium, one of those hops, as they used to call them in those days. And probably a full set in those days was probably 20 minutes, 25. I don't think anybody had more than 25 minutes worth of material. So unfortunately, when we did that show, they were our backup band, and we had only rehearsed. We rehearsed enough. It was marginal. Rehearsed enough to fill up whatever. I think we were scheduled to do 25 minutes, let's say. So we were pretty sure that we had rehearsed enough to do 25 minutes. And somehow, either we played the music quicker than normal, and at the end of what we had rehearsed with the Beach Boys, the promoter was looking at his watch going, that's 10 minutes short. 10 minutes. It felt like a lifetime to us. Oh, God, what are we going to do? And maybe it wasn't 10. It was probably more like 8. But in those days, 8 minutes? That could be 3 songs. So we kind of looked around, and the Beach Boys said, "Well, I guess we could do one of your latest hits that we did earlier in the set. We'll just do it again." And that seemed really schlock, even for us in those days. It seemed kind of garage bandish, and we went, no. That's we just did it. I know. Why don't we do some of your music? We'll just sing along. We knew it well enough, and they said, "Well, you're going to sing our songs? Heck yeah, you got great songs. We'd be honored to sing your songs." And of course, the discussion on stage probably took up another 3 minutes, which then we only had to do 2 of their songs, and everybody seemed to like it. We enjoyed it. They got a kick out of it. And from that point on, we just said we should try some music together.
Beach Boys kicking things off on a vocal group level was an astounding shift in public consciousness for wave riding itself. Surfboard manufacturers benefited from this. People who during the 1950s were building their small businesses in board making and who were now able to meet the demand from teenagers suddenly interested in their wares. The Beach Boys' Surfin' remained at number 2 for many weeks during early 1962, outpacing Dick Dale, the Bel Airs, and the Marquettes. But if you notice, 3 of the 4 records mentioned had their roots in the South Bay. Surfer magazine was just beginning its run at the time, too, with the original publisher John Severson hiring Haggerty's regular Rick Griffin to be their identifying cartoon artist. Picked up originally by board maker and big wave legend Greg Knoll to illustrate his Search for Surf film short series, Griffin would evolve to become one of the primary psychedelic poster artists for the San Francisco music scene beginning in 1966. During the early 60s, Griffin made his way working for Surfer on the character Murphy, based loosely on Rick himself. In his spare time, Rick kept busy painting the studio walls for the Bel Air's Paul Johnson's new endeavor in 1964, and did additional graphic work for Bel Air Richard Delvy's new band, The Challengers, and Delvy's own label, Vault Records. The Challengers happened to be the most commercially successful offspring from the original Bel Airs, recording 15 albums for Vault and GMP Crescendo, and this is actually a Rick Griffin art there. K39 wound up being the Challengers' definitive recording, released in 1963. The song was about a surf spot 39 kilometers south of the border in Baja, California. Okay, so Richard Delvey had brought with him pianist Jim Roberts from the Bel Airs, then found bassman Randy Nauert and original guitarists Glenn Gray and Don Landis. The lineup made a major shift by 1964 when saxophonist Phil Pruden came over from Tom Star and the Galaxies, with Art Fisher from the Journeymen and the most recent lineup of the Bel Airs also joining the band. The Challengers then added Ed Fournier, and Ed and Art essentially replaced Gray and Landis as the guitar players. The Challengers sustained their odyssey as the last remaining surf instrumental band on Earth through to the end of the 1960s. Some of these adventures included recording a lot of stock music for KHJ-TV Channel 9 in Los Angeles. KHJ-TV was producing a lot of teen-oriented shows, including Surf's Up with Stan Richards, who showed surfing movies, interviewed the surf filmmakers, then had a musical break with the show's house band, the Challengers. By 1965, KHJ Radio was on its way to becoming LA's #1 broadcast radio station, competing then with KRLA, KBLA, and all three of those surpassing the previous favorite, KFWB, for attention. The Challengers became the background music on KHJ, and they were on-stage regulars at the Teenage Fair and the big surfing contests in California and Hawaii, and at a party for the Grammy Awards in 1965, the real Hollywood Works. In an entirely different sense, the Bel Air's original lead guitar player, Eddie Bertrand, took with him drummer Richard Delvy's Bel Air's replacement, Dickie Dodd, and formed a very hot band called Eddie and the Showmen. Now, it would be said that Dickie Dodd was pretty much an incredible drummer, and in comparison to Richard Delvy, I mean, he blew him away. And Eddie Bertrand's sonic lead guitar parts were tearing all over the place in this group. Eddie and the Showmen became Dick Dale's main competition for drawing kids to the dance floor in Southern California during 1963 and 1964. One only has to hear a little of their version of the Venture's Scratch to reveal how Eddie and the Showmen would go beyond most surf bands in sheer aggressive talent. Scratch was one of several great records by Eddie and the Showmen. They made only 5 singles on Liberty Records, though every one of their 10 released tracks was pretty astounding. Mr. Rebel was their only song to wind up on the local KRLA chart at number 34 for about a month. Still, this was a group who was the house band at the Retail Clerks Auditorium in Buena Park near Knott's Berry Farm. In fact, the picture we just saw of Eddie and the Showmen was taken at Retail Clerks. They opened for headliners such as the Beach Boys, the Ventures, the Lively Ones. Come Whale at the Retail was the ballroom's tagline, and it was really the top action spot in LA during 1963. This success would cause an actual rivalry between Eddie and the Showmen and Dick Dale and his Deltones, who held sway at Harmony Park Ballroom in Anaheim during the same era. Most of this was brought on by the loyalty of the teenage fans who would rouse one another and sometimes got territorial in the parking lots of the respective dance venues. It was really just charged teenage fun, where if you were a regular at Dick Dale's dances, you'd be called a traitor for having an Eddie and the Showmen record in your collection. A close friend to the Bel Airs in the early days was Tom Starr, who also hailed from Redondo Beach. Tom made some recordings for a Rick Griffin emblazoned compilation on Richard Delvy's Vault label, including a cover of the Bel Air's most popular dance number, Chief Lotto. Picking up musicians out of the Bel Air's audience, Tom also recorded a then unreleased LP with KFWB disc jockey Ted Quillen producing. That beautiful bit finally came out in 2010 in a deluxe package. Really, though, it was just a quickie exploitation album in the early 60s that never got released, recording of a band that just happened to be great, you know, wonderfully schlocky titles, including Jellyfish Kiss, The Big Ding, Cherry Wipeout, Woody Welcome Wagon, and Surfer's Bubble. Those just keep the imagination alive, don't they? I mean, the music itself shows all the soul underneath, really. And this is Tom Starr's, one of their better numbers called Renegade. One of Tom Starr's early lineups had featured Challengers saxophonist Phil Pruden, so Tom had a good eye for talent. The final incarnation of Tom Starr and the Galaxies had to make an adjustment because their leader, Tom Starr, had some serious personal issues to deal with. The band found a replacement in the Bel Air's songwriter and rhythm guitar player, Paul Johnson. Playing dances during the second incarnation of the Bel Airs with Art Fisher on guitar, Steve Lotto on bass, Al Tiny Schneider on drums, and Chaz Stewart on saxophone, Paul had still been writing songs for both Eddie and the Showmen and the Challengers as well. For G&P Crescendo, Johnson also led an all-star session for a skateboard exploitation album as The Good Guys. For this particular album, Paul called John Anderson from Eddie and the Showmen, Art Fisher from the Bel Airs, session drummer Hal Blaine, and Challengers keyboardist Jim Roberts, with the Challengers saxophonist Phil Pruden as well. But with PJ and the Galaxies, Paul had his own group to share his compositions with, and so was born this great new South Bay surf band in 1964, PJ and the Galaxies. Rhythm guitarist Jim Boyle, bass player Steve Pugh, and drummer Skip Hand were the first to record with Paul at his new PM studio, co-owned by engineer Mike Leitz in Redondo Beach. This is Paul Johnson's original from the sessions called Lanky Bones. PM Studio sat in a charming Redondo Beach neighborhood, a block from the beach and a mile down the road from the Revelair Club, the nucleus of the South Bay surf music scene. Accordingly, it provided a warm and friendly place for local musicians to congregate. PJ and the Galaxies recorded enough tracks to make a fine album, but that wasn't released until 1995. Paul kept busy in 1964 playing dances with the Galaxies and in the making of his studio. Rick Griffin did promotional material for it, and as mentioned earlier, there was Rick Griffin Murphy-style artwork all over the PM studio walls. Paul and Mike Leach recorded several acts there, including a young Larry Carlton as a quasi-solo artist wheeling McSidewalk in the Ball Bearings, a name conjured up by Rick Griffin. Larry at the time was a rhythm guitar player with Eddie and the Showmen, and with him and Eddie and Dick Dodd all jamming together, that was some band. Here's a little bit of PM studio sessions with Paul Johnson and Mike Leach supervising, where Larry Carlton did a spontaneous jam session with a Santa Ana surf group called the Nocturnes, and they were playing Mel Torme's hit, Coming Home Baby. Eddie and the Showmen were a talented lair. Outside of Eddie's lead guitar and Dickie's lightning kick drums, they had Larry Carlton for a time in 1964, joining with Showman regulars, saxophonist Bob Knight, and second rhythm guitarist Rob Edwards, who later joined a band called Colors. The rhythm guitar player previous to Larry Carlton was another otherwise unknown guy who made a great record, John Anderson. John formed his own group called the Baymen as a side group from Eddie and the Showmen. Anderson was double jointed in his wrists, so he really had a quick way of playing rhythm guitar that was quite unique. Here with the Baymen, he's a lead guitarist on one of the great surf records called BONZAI. Eddie and the Showmen were not only a house band at Retail Clerks Hall in Buena Park, but really started out as a house band at a place in Redondo Beach called the Revelair. The Revelair originated as the Bel Air Club, an actual teenage dance club opened precisely around the popularity of Mr. MOTO. I mean, Mr. MOTO came out and the band invested in their own club and they filled it up for over a year until they started splintering. The Bel Air Club had a nautical tiki theme. You can see in these pictures here, there's palm trees on stage and netting and all that stuff. And they played there for about a year, but as the group splintered, it was shared by all the other groups coming out. The Eddie and the Showmen, the Challengers played there, and other groups. But one of the new house bands was called the Crossfire, and this is their debut single, Fiberglass Jungle. Now, the Crossfires are known as a show band for their wild stage antics and songs like Chunky, where teenagers would take forbidden spoons out of their pockets and purses and fondle each other's genitals with said spoons during a soon-to-be banned dance craze at the Revelair. Really, the Crossfires were a solid band led by lead guitarist Al Nicole, with rhythm guitarist Jim Tucker, drummer Don Murray, bass player Chuck Bortz, and saxophonist singers Mark Bowman and Howard Kalin. This band would evolve to become the Turtles in mid-1965 when their manager, KRLA DJ Reb Foster, moved them into the Crescendo Tiger Tail on the Sunset Strip in June of 1965, become the house band. Instantly, the Turtles hit with a cover of Bob Dylan's It Ain't Me, Babe. The band went on to have many other hits, the most famous being Happy Together. There were, of course, other guys who never got very far out of the South Bay. Here's one of those groups, the Vibrants, who started out in 1961 from Manhattan Beach. A traditional Spanish tune, Andalusia, better known as The Breeze and I, as performed by the Vibrants. The Bel Airs had done it live and spread it as a cover throughout Southern California. Among the many surf instrumental versions of the tune, the Vibrants defined it best, I think. Dave Stadler's emotional lead guitar stands out. He'd switched from the bass on this one track. He played lead guitar. With the band's regular guitarist, Tony Goodich, adding color with rhythm arpeggios over a breaking wave seagull sound effect. Closely related to the Vibrants were the Revelairs, also from Manhattan Beach. Yes, they shared their name with a teen dance club in Redondo Beach, but this was a band that also captured the atmosphere of their environment perfectly. Guitarist Mark Stotesbury and drummer Bill Humphrey had been on many surfing expeditions together before they realized they had both been musicians the whole time. they'd heard the Ventures, the Fireballs, and Johnny and the Hurricanes in the John Severson and Bruce Brown surfing films. They picked up the style of the Bel-Airs, but carried it farther into the year 1964. At one point, the Revelaires picked up the Vibrant's Tony Goodich for a 3-guitar rhythm and dual lead guitar exchange. Here's a song by the band heard in a Bud Brown surfing film, Spinning Boards, nicked from tape on TV by Bud Brown during a TV broadcast of a short-lived Western series called Black Saddle. The Revelaires seemed to take things as far as they could go because by the end of 1964, most of these bands had already moved on to do other things during the mid-60s, understandably. The Walker Brothers were a soulful group who had interchange with all these people in the South Bay, including John Mouse, their guitarist, giving lessons to Carl Wilson and David Marks of the Beach Boys. The Walker Brothers had a house band gig at the original La Cienega location of Gazzari's, but by early 1965, they moved permanently to England and had a lot of hits there. Bass player Carl Radel from a one-record South Bay group called the Fabulous Playboys, and it was a good one, Cheater Stomp, would later play on George Harrison's All Things Must Pass and the Concert for Bangladesh before becoming the bass player with Eric Clapton in Derek and the Dominos. The Turtles had their many hits, and the Beach Boys recorded more hit records than any American band would during the entire 60s. Then they even had a larger influence on the recording industry when Brian Wilson produced the music for Pet Sounds, Good Vibrations, and the band's opus Smile. Paul Johnson formed a folk rock group out of PM Studios called the Ever-Present Fullness. That's Paul in the center in the middle of that hole there. And so the Challengers and Mike Leitz, they continued their recording careers in Hollywood. Eddie Bertrand was drafted into the Army, and by the time he got back, it was the Monterey Pop Festival days, so he really had to swim around for a while, try to find his music, you know. Larry Carlton joined the Jazz Crusaders and went on to a successful solo career in jazz. Dickie Dodd joined the Standells in 1964, and the group had several hits, including Dirty Water, Sometimes Good Guys Don't Wear White, Why Pick on Me, and the theme to the movie Riot on Sunset Strip. Now, the Bel Air Club, which became the Revelaire after a while, here we can see good pictures of the Revelaire, that had been the Bel Air Club, but it had a short 3-gig lifetime during the early psychedelic days as the Third Eye. Shows by Buffalo Springfield and the Turtles notwithstanding, the city fathers around Redondo Beach wanted that kind of thing out of there as quickly as possible. So there went the story and the end of the original South Bay surf music scene. Let's close the show with another one of those great 145 RPM record groups from the area, the Fabulous Playboys with Cheater Stomp.
So fun.
Oh, that was awesome. Although I'm so sorry I didn't get that clip in there. For some reason, it wouldn't play. It played this afternoon. So I'll tell you what I'm going to do, folks. I'm going to edit that into the video that goes up on YouTube. Inexcusable.
All right.
Oh my gosh, that was really interesting. I liked listening to all the different music. I agree. Michelle and I both mentioned earlier that there were definitely some songs that we haven't heard before.
Yeah, I was vibing out over here. Y'all couldn't see me, but I got my disco lights going. I was all awesome.
Oh, I see the lights in the background.
Yeah, DJ Media Ho right here.
Fantastic. Sponsored.
All right.
Oh my gosh, that was really fun. Okay, I'm gonna stop my
I love this question. Can we throw a question out, Jamie?
Yeah. Let's do it.
Okay.
Let's do
Will
it.
Terry has a question. How many bands use studio session musicians like the Wrecking Crew instead of playing themselves on recordings? It's a great question.
Well, the Beach Boys were the group that used the session guys most, but they didn't use them at first. It was the original. I mean, Dennis Wilson did play drums on, for example, Don't Worry Baby. In 1963, 64, you know, the first time that they used Hal Blaine, the drummer I mentioned earlier, was the song Little Deuce Coupe. But Brian Wilson heard Phil Spector's Be My Baby in 1963 and said, okay, this is the direction I'm going to go with my production. And from that point on, he started building, you know, the sound that became California Girls and Let 'Em Run Wild and Pet Sounds. So that was another kind of Beach Boys. But the Beach Boys that had the biggest hit-making impact were really when they still were playing all the instruments themselves. They kept on having hits, of course, but the impact happened with the band playing their own instruments.
Awesome.
If you guys have any more questions, feel free to drop them in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen so we can answer them for you. Let's see.
Jamie, I have a quick question for you. Are there any displays at the museum that have to do with surf music?
Yeah, we do actually have quite a few albums at the museum, and I think, let's see, surf music. Not as much as I'd like currently. I think we have a little,
that'd be cool.
yeah, I think we have a little more jazz stuff out. On the Beach Boys specifically, we did have a company recently that donated an awesome surfboard to us, I think last year. It's a replica of Dennis Wilson's surfboard. Because as far as I know, he was the only one of the Beach Boys that actually surfed. So when they shot their album cover, they grabbed his surfboard off of his car because he was the only one that had one. So there was a group of guys that actually started reproducing them last year, Hermosa Surfboard Company, which is pretty awesome. Oh, and Chris Miller says,
real quick, hold on.
yeah. Chris Miller says the jukebox has many 45, yeah, a lot of surf 45s. Yeah, if you guys, when the museum does reopen, you can come down and play with the jukebox. We have some really awesome records in there.
Okay.
A lot of this stuff,
by myself too.
There's a lot of this stuff is released on CD. I don't know. Here's the Bel Airs. You know, like in the 60s, they didn't really release very many songs, but we found about 2 albums worth of material that they recorded. And so this is the Bel Airs CD. And then we also released an Eddie and the Showman CD. I don't know if you can see that, I'm tilting down, but Eddie and the Showman Squad Car. And then there was a series we did called Rare Surf. And Rare Surf had PJ and the Galaxies, and Willie McSidewalk and the Ball Bearings, the Journeymen. And then there's a second one with the Revelaires and the Vibrants and the Nocturnes, and Willie McSidewalk and the Ball Bearings. So there's the base for all that music, and then there's the Beach Boys, which are easily found. Capitol always reissues that stuff. It's very important catalog for Capitol Records, of course.
Yeah.
From
Mark,
ahead, Michelle.
Yeah, Mark had a question, Mark Shoemaker. Did Rick and the Ravens record any surf music before transitioning into the Doors?
Rick and the Ravens were not really a surf group. They were a group that played at dances, and they played a lot of the you know, like it's like the Walker Brothers. They're playing rhythm and blues hits and songs that, like, a lot of the surf dances, they played an instrumental, and then the band played a rhythm and blues hit. You know, before the Beatles came out, it was all the rock and roll songs were really pretty much rhythm and blues songs, unless it was Jerry Lee Lewis, Whole Lot of Shakin', or covering an Elvis song maybe. But primarily, they were playing rhythm and blues songs, Rick and the Ravens, and the same with the Walker Brothers. So those groups I didn't really kind of include in my speech that much.
Cool.
I have one from Chip. He's asking, do you have any facts or anything about the guitars and amps those guys were using for their performances?
You know, there's so many groups and so many guys, but to be honest with you, most of them were playing Fender. I mean, I could just look at this pictures on the cover of the record and see that they're all playing Fender guitars, Fender bass. I mean, Fender was the de rigueur. I mean, like Eddie Bertrand from Eddie and the Showman, for example, who was like the best guitar player in the bunch. I mean, Larry Carlton aside for whatever his talents are, Eddie was the really good, you know, surf music ripper like Dick Dale. And him and Dick Dale both went down to Leo Fender's factory in Fullerton all the time to get, you know, amps. I mean, Leo Fender worked directly with Eddie Bertrand and worked directly with Dick Dale to design amplifiers that would sound wet. You know, it was a big thing to get the reverb tank. Leo Fender invented a separate reverb tank, and the reason why Eddie and the Showman were called that is because there was a Showman amplifier with Fender. So they were working together, and like there was like most of the amplifiers only had like one speaker in it, but like Eddie said, can we put 2 in there? You know, and Leo put 2 in. So that's the twin Showman, you know. And so Fender evolved a bit with surf music, and people in England they wished they could have gotten Fender gear. Like they were always playing out of Vox gear. The Beatles only played Vox because that was local to them, but they wished they had Fender. And Bobby Fuller Ford moved out here from Texas, and then they were playing Fender, and then the sponsors tried to make them play Vox. No way, give us back that Fender stuff, you know.
That's cool. Chris Miller had a question. Hi, Chris. When was Pipeline recorded and who recorded the song?
The band
One-
that recorded the song is Shantays, and it was recorded originally in 1962, and the title was called, it was originally Liberty's Whip, based on the Who Shot Liberty Valance movie, I believe. And, but, you know, the surfing trend was coming up, and they said, okay, this is actually, let's make this big sound, you know, and that's where the Pipeline, they'd seen in one of the Bud Brown or Bruce Brown movies that the Pipeline was just being pioneered at the time. People didn't even surf Pipeline before 1962 or 63. So it was a big scene in the movie when Pipeline happened in the surfing movies. Therefore, you know, the song immediately caught on to that new phenomenon in surfing.
Domenic, you are truly an encyclopedia. It's just amazing.
I get that sometimes.
So impressive. Let's see. Stephen has a question. What was the role, if any, of the El Monte Legion Stadium as a venue for surf music?
Well, the Beach Boys played there in 1964. There's that. The El Monte Legion Stadium has two different lives in a way. During the 1950s, Art LeBeau was booking all the shows there, and whoever was big in rock and roll that came through LA, whether it was Jerry Lee Lewis or Little Richard or whoever, they do their headlining gig at El Monte Legion Stadium because the city of Los Angeles really didn't want rock and roll down there. They had rhythm and blues shows at the Shrine Auditorium downtown. That's going back to the 40s. And some of the downtown theaters had rhythm and blues shows. But when it came to the mixed audience thing, that rock and roll, like it was such a phenomenon from 1955 to 1958 of black kids and white kids coming together. This was more than the city fathers had really bargained for. You remember in the 1940s that like a white woman going to a jazz club, you know, would get busted for, you know, going to, you know, a club that had black people, you know. So by the mid 50s, these teenagers were all congregating together at rock and roll shows, and it's like beyond the imagination of what the city fathers would have handled at the time. And Art LeBeau took care of that problem by going to sort of an ethnic community, El Monte, which was, I believe, something like 80% Chicano there. And then after Art LeBeau didn't book as many shows there, it became more like a Chicano rock and roll venue. And so the diverse audience at El Monte sort of kind of went away a bit in the early 60s. However, you know, whoever was like the great local bands, like for example, the Beach Boys played there. I know Richie Valens played out there too. So yeah, it was a bit of a mix up in the early 60s, but the Beach Boys did play at El Monte Legion Stadium, and they were big that time, so the kids loved them, you know.
So cool. I have to jump to this question because I'm such a Quentin Tarantino fan. I'm a music supervisor, and the music in his films is so inspirational to me. I have all the vinyl soundtracks, the whole deal. Do you think that because he was from here, he was influenced by the surf music culture? The question Paul has here is what motivated Tarantino to revitalize surf music in his films, especially Pulp Fiction?
You touched on a part of it. I think there's another part of it that kind of goes unspoken, is that, you know, radio programmers stopped really paying attention to what local music was about. And in the early 60s, I mean, surf music was a national trend, but there were a hell of a lot more hit records in LA that were surf records, especially by Dick Dale. I mentioned earlier that Dick Dale's first surf record was Let's Go Trippin' in fall of 1961. And none of the other records he made, Miserlou included, hit the national charts. So when oldies radio started getting programmed in the 70s, it was this whole thing about demographics and science and math, and they just completely cut out like local audience there. But a guy like Tarantino is going to have grown up,
right?
Miserlou, and you know, as a primary. It's another thing, like even in the mid 60s, the Buffalo Springfield, all their records were top 5, top 10 in Los Angeles, but nationally only one, For What It's Worth, made it. So this kind of localized thing with surf music, I'm sure Tarantino, like in my case, my sister had all like 3 or 4 Dick Dale 45s. Maybe Tarantino knew somebody who had those 45s, and I mean, they were ubiquitous. I mean, and Dick Dale's Surfer's Choice album was ubiquitous in LA. I knew a kid in the 90s, I need that album. I said, come on, let's go. I took him to a record store that I knew in Buena Park, and they always seemed to have a copy of Surfer's Choice. And he couldn't believe it, but like there it was, like an independent album from 1963. So, I mean, Dick Dale's Surfer's Choice was like to the early 60s what Frampton Comes Alive was to the early 70s in LA only, if you can imagine.
Right.
So it was a hot live album, and I mean, my copy is my next door neighbor's copy because my copy got burned out. It was my sister's copy, and I destroyed it basically, but I still have it. But I have my next door neighbor's copy because every teenager on the block had it, you know.
Wow. Did any of the surf bands play the Lighthouse?
Well, not until many, many, many years later. We had in 1986. I became involved with the South Bay Surf Musicians when they had a reunion, and I filmed their reunion. And then after that, they had a couple more reunions in the South Bay, and then they did one at the Lighthouse, and that was really cool. And then by that time, they started bringing in musicians who weren't even from the South Bay, like Bob Demon from the Astronauts, who were from Colorado. They were one of the great surf bands. They moved out here in '62 and did this record called Baja. Well, the Pyramids from Orange County had a hit record called Penetration. You know, Willie Glover from that band came. So people who had surf instrumental hits started to come down to this South Bay surf reunion thing and coloring it more. And now there's a surf guitar, it's called Surf Guitar 101, I believe. It's a international surf music web page, and they have concerts every year, like twice a year. Plus in Huntington Beach, they have monthly show, you know, pre and post COVID. Every month there's a surf music concert on a Sunday. They're called Surfin' Sundays. You can look for that. This guy Jeff Hansen does those, and a guy named Lorenzo in Italy does this big surf music festival in Italy. But like it's really popular over there now. I mean, heck.
Awesome. Let's see. Paul also had another question. How did you become connected with Brian Wilson?
Long, slow process. Back in like 1988, well, 87 actually, Brian was making his very first solo album, and the guy who was working directly with him, Andy Paley, had been told by a friend of mine, Greg Shaw, that I'm kind of like a Beach Boys expert of some kind. So I would go to Andy's apartment, and there was about 60 to 80 Brian Wilson songs that they were demoing, and I was listening to all these demos and helping him sort through all the Brian Wilson demos. And eventually I got invited to the studio to hear some of Brian's previously unreleased Smile music, and I started to help them in 1987, 88, kind of try to figure out what Smile was. And eventually I knew these guys who were really good musicians who understand the Beach Boys music better than the guys that were backing them. So one thing led to another, and I introduced my friends to Brian's people indirectly, and then that still is Brian Wilson's band. And so Brian Wilson and I have, you know, associated directly and indirectly, but mostly through the offices, you know, because it's a big business that, you know, now Brian's got been doing tours for many, many years, and it's really helped sustain him that he's been touring all this time. Because one guy from the South Bay who used to manage the Beach Boys before their father did said Brian could be lazy, very lazy. He could work hard and then he gets lazy, because people who work really hard, they tend to crash out a lot, you know. And Brian was a real extrovert, worked really, really hard on those records, but then he just kind of like, that whole mystique of him going in his bedroom for 3 years.
Right.
So he's a guy who basically needed to be continually active, and he has a pretty good group working for him now, this whole system. And he's been able to tour for about 20 odd years now.
Yeah, I know members of his band. It's really good. David Arnson is asking, one would often hear about the dance craze of the time, the surfer stomp. He wants to know if you could guide us to a video that might best show those steps.
You would have to have me.
Are you going to do it for us?
I'm getting this table right here, and you get your feet, you see.
Domenic.
A live demonstration, folks. You won't see it anywhere else.
I watched Tony Bassel do some dance classes a while ago.
You are fully committed. I accept that respect.
Can you see my feet? I don't know. You go. Dun, 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 dun. And you keep your arms like at the side like this. So that's it. You just kind of stomp around. There was a record called Foot Stomping by the Flares. Y'all heard that record? Foot stomping, foot stomping, foot stomping. And that's kind of how the idea of the surfer stomp kind of came around, because this was a popular R&B record, Foot Stomping by the Flares, 1961. And so the kids that were doing the Surfer Stomp were basically picking it up from foot stomping, which was a combination of two dances in the 50s, chicken and the hop.
Is that it?
And I could show you the chicken and I could show you the hop. But maybe if you look up the chicken and the hop and then put them together and then dance the Flair's foot stomping, then you might get an idea of how to do the actual surfer stomp. But I did the best I could.
It was impressive.
That was more than we thought we were going to get in this very moment.
Yeah.
I didn't.
Instructional video.
Oh my
Well, you
God.
got to have a wood dance floor and you got to wear good shoes. I happen to be having bare feet right now. I don't know if you saw that, but yeah.
We saw it.
Oh, good.
It was perfect. And
Uh,
we have
Bill-
actually a comment from Bill Humphrey saying,
Yeah,
thanks for
that's
this.
cool.
A shout out. I just released the release material on an album called Guitars and Longboards. It should be available in a few days. So Bill, Dominic, if you guys want to get together and send us a link to that, I'd love to share it on our website for any folks that want to check it out.
Yeah,
and
Bill
connect
Humphrey was the
program.
drummer for the Revelaires.
Mhm.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah, he was in the last band we heard him play Black Saddle drums.
Awesome. We sounded great, Bill.
Stunning. And then Chris is asking, do you consider the Santa Monica Civic Auditorium a contribution to the growth of surf music as a venue?
Yeah, it was. And I want to wax a little bit about that because Bruce Brown, who had the movie The Endless Summer, he actually started making movies about 58, 59 with Slippery When Wet. And I don't know when he first started to show his movies at the Santa Monica Civic, but, and I'm not sure who all else showed at Santa Monica Civic, but Bruce Brown would fill the Santa Monica Civic, you know, and you're talking about, you know, popcorn, popcorn dispensers get flattened and thrown all over the place. And people, this was like people would go, they were teenagers and they would just go radical in there and they get really excited when they watch the surfing scenes. And of course, Bruce Brown had good music, you know, like they used, well, it wasn't just Bruce Brown, but I think it's important to mention that Bud Brown started making surf movies in the 1940s. Bruce Brown started in the late 50s. And in between them is this guy, John Severson, who was a surfer publisher, and Greg Knoll, who was a surfboard manufacturer. They were kind of making these movies to promote their boards, really. You know, they put a lot of good music that was unlicensed in their films. So people got really excited because they'd be hearing all these, either these big rock and roll hits like by Duane Eddy or the Ventures or something in the movie. And that had a big influence on the bands actually playing the music. And then I heard that the Greg McGillivray, Jim Freeman 1972 movie, 5 Summer Stories, also debuted at the Santa Monica Civic, which was the, Greg and Jim Freeman, who did that film, called that the last surfing movie. Of course, they continue to make them, but that was like the last surfing movie of that era. And it was, by that time, the surfers had grown their hair out and were doing psychedelic drugs. And so Santa Monica Civic was thick with pot smoke during the 5 Summer Stories screening. But there was also stuff at the Santa Monica Civic, like they had a surf fair at the Santa Monica Civic. The bands would play, like the New Dimensions and all these bands, Dave Myers and Surf Tones would play at it. My sister went to, I still have the ticket stub from that. There was more than one surf fair that happened there too, where they had surfboards and surf filmmakers and surfing movies, and the bands would play. So in the early 60s, yeah, the Santa Monica Civic was sort of a nucleus. Also the Deauville Castle Club in Santa Monica, which was torn down, I believe, in '65, had the biggest surf music concert of all time. And everybody but Dick Dale and the Bel Airs played there. It was the Chantays, the Lively Ones, all the groups, you know, that people were hearing on the radio at the time, played at the Deauville Castle Club Surf Battle. It was a 3-day concert. It was almost like the Woodstock of surfing in early 1963.
I actually have a couple of questions that ended up over in the chat.
Yeah, I was just seeing that too. Yeah.
Okay. Go ahead, Michelle, if you want to read Mark and Ricardo out.
Yeah, Ricardo, that's kind of what Ricardo's asking. What held the groups back from having vocals? Or were they instrumental only, most of them?
Well, they're following in the line of their main inspirations, who were in the 1950s, Duane Eddy and Link Ray, who did nothing but instrumentals. I mean, this was the lead guitar, or the lead guitarist primarily was the voice of the song, you know, and they felt that you can get a deeper emotional wherewithal from the music if the tonality came from like a deep, thick, you know, hollow body guitar sound that was rich, and then a saxophone that had a really soul. In those days, rock and roll, you know, saxophone was the soul, the rhythm and blues roots that went back to jazz, actually, with Louis Jordan and Timpani 5 turned jazz into rock and roll in the 40s. Saxophone was like the primary soulful instrument. So yeah, they didn't feel that they really needed vocals. It would kind of get in the way of what they were doing, which makes what the Beach Boys did interesting, because they took this whole vocal doo-wop sound, really, the rhythm and blues vocal group sound, and applied it to sort of a surfing lyric. But then, as I said earlier, they tried to do that in front of an audience at the Rendezvous Ballroom for Dick Dale's audience. They were going, boo, you know. So Brian got a band together with his brothers, and they learned how to play surf instrumental. They covered Dick Dale on their second album. They covered Miserlou, and they covered Let's Go Trippin', I mean, right away. So that was the most exciting thing in 1961 to 63 really was the instrumental sound. It was just like, you know, balls to the wall, hardcore music. It was really, really hardcore rock and roll. And the Beach Boys almost brought a softer thing into it with the vocals. Let's put it that way. But also a welcome thing, because the hardball sound behind surf music matched with the vocals was an instant hit all over the country and all over the world. The Beach Boys went to England in '64. I Get Around was their first English hit. And then by 1966, when they did Pet Sounds, they were really, you know, ready to, you know, break through to the same audience. The Beatles loved them and all that stuff. They recognized Brian Wilson's way with the song. So Brian was a unique individual in that scene. But on the Jan and Dean interview we have with you, you can hear how Jan and Dean came into the situation. They were playing a place in Hermosa Beach. And so Jan and Dean and Brian Wilson kind of got together, and then they wrote Surf City, Drag City, New Girl in School, Ride the Wild Surf, Dead Man's Curve, like 5 big Jan and Dean hits. And Sidewalk Surfing, actually, if you count that, 6 big Jan and Dean hits were co-written by Jan Berry and Brian Wilson. So that's kind of the vocal surf sound. And there are a few other copycat vocal people like Bruce and Terry and the Superstocks, but even the Superstocks, half of their songs were instrumentals.
Interesting. So did, Mark wants to know, did Link Ray ever play with any surf bands or promote himself as a surf musician? And how did he feel about his sound being exploited?
No, I don't think Link Ray gave too much of a damn, because his 2 hits were Rawhide and Rumble back in the 1950s. And he did not have another big hit until surf music broke in 1963. That song was called Jack the Ripper. And interestingly enough, I think Jack the Ripper is the basis musically for the Doors song LA Woman. If you listen to even the lyrics to Doors LA Woman, it's like about somebody kind of hiding out with a knife someplace or something. And Jack the Ripper, obviously. So yeah, that's a pretty good piece of music. And a lot of surf instrumental bands covered Jack the Ripper, you know, that was because it was a hit in '63. And surf music kind of brought back the late 1950s instrumental sound. Lonnie Mack had a hit with Chuck Berry's Memphis, but he stripped Memphis of Chuck Berry's words and just played an instrumental version of Memphis. That was a big hit in 1964. And that was a Southern instrumentalist, you know? So I think the rock instrumental artists benefited from surf music breaking through. And Dwayne Eddy did an album called Water Skiing, which is kind of absurd. He's on water skis, you know, that's his surfing, I guess.
So cool. Well, anybody who's interested in hearing some of the music that we played tonight, I did put a Spotify playlist up on the Hermosa Beach Historical Society website with some of the songs. Not all of them are on Spotify, so I can add to that some of the other songs that we had on YouTube that we were pulling up as well.
Oh, fantastic. So that everybody can check those out later if they want to. And also to check out later, thank you, Chip, for sending us.
Hey, Chip.
On my phone, but it's actually, I don't know if you can see it, probably not. Probably not. It's an instructional page from a book on how to do the surfer's stomp. So I'm going to post, I'm so thrilled. This is great. Of course, Chip. I know, of course, Chip has like a book like this hiding.
Of course you do, Chip.
Well, I'll tell you something about the surfer stomp. I mean, I could do it for you in person, but I do have.
I wish you would, Domenic. Someday.
I have a book called Pop Surf Culture, and I just thought about this. There is a chapter in there about how to do the surfer stomp. In the course of my doing all these liner notes and writings about this, I ran into a girl who was going to school at the University of Irvine, and she was a dance, in dance classes of some kind, modern dance, and she was going to do her thesis on the surfer stomp. And I went, whoa. So I found out where she was, and we got in touch with each other, and I basically got her rough thesis. Now her instructors told her to do another thesis and she had to throw it away, but I kept it, and I ended up publishing it with embellishments so that we could make sure that it was really understood. But in my book, Pop Surf Culture, there is a chapter that this girl, Susie, and I collaborated on, so to speak, as to how to do the dance.
That's awesome. I didn't even know it existed.
Hold your hands to the side like this and let your feet go up and down like that.
I knew it existed, but I don't think I knew all of the details. So I'm going to post this illustration on our Instagram and Facebook tonight. So if you want to practice this at home, if you want to send me a video, we'll put it up on our Instagram too.
Martha, I want to see you doing it.
Yes, Martha.
There's actually a film of Dick Dale playing at the Harmony Park Ballroom in Anaheim, and you could see kids. This film was made to run on television shows across the country, because Dick didn't want to tour because he had a zoo at his house, basically. So, and they're trying to, in 1963, when they make the film, they're trying to show how the dances are done, because that's what kids into rock and roll in 1963 were interested in, is how to do the new dances that were coming out all the time. And this one from California was like, the only way to really do it is go right down to Dick Dale's show and show these close-ups of these kids dancing to Dick Dale. So that's out there. The movie, or the film, is like 15 minutes or something, and it's called King of the Stomp. And in that film, you could really see the surfer stomp for real. And one more thing I should mention about it is you see these kids just jumping straight up once in a while, popping up out of the crowd. And I swear to you, it is the exact same thing that was called pogoing in punk rock later in 1976, 77, when people, before slam dancing and all that happened, it was pogo. And they actually did this pogo dance step in you're stomping, and all of a sudden you just get on both feet and go straight up, like you just jump up and land down. And that's kind of how, and you'll see that in King of the Stomp, people actually doing the pogo step.
Wow, so cool.
Okay, we have, let's see, we have 3 more questions. Let's see if we can get through them real quick. Okay, from Paul, my dog's name is Wilson. I'm from Hawthorne and married Rhonda. Oh my goodness. What early Beach Boys album, Pre-Pet Sounds, is your favorite and why?
Well, there's 2 that I really like for the Pre-Pet Sounds, and that is Surfin' USA, because I did mention that, like, that to me was the impactful album that the Beach Boys made. That broke them nationally. I mean, without Surfin' USA, I don't think the Beach Boys would have been the big hit that they were. The song Surfin' USA itself had such a stunning, guitar attack. Carl Wilson does a solo in there. It's super great. I mean, it's super clean. And then that organ solo is like Dave Baby Cortez, the happy organ. It's such a good song. But then all the rest of the songs on the album have that tonality of Surfin' USA. And in Mono, that is really kind of my favorite early Beach Boys album. But it's matched by All Summer Long from 1964, a year later, because All Summer Long really is like, you want an ice cream with California in it that you can eat. That All Summer Long album has everything in it. Like, and Brian had also picked up his production chops back then. The song All Summer Long itself starts out with a sort of a marimba vibe, and it really feels like you're at the beach or something like that. Capitol Records, you know, Brian Wilson, the production, everything was in place. Nat King Cole had a song that year called The Lazy, Crazy, Hazy Days of Summer. So they were already into marketing summer like that at Capitol. They knew how to exploit the sun and surf. Even, you know, earlier albums like Jack Fascinato did a Palm Springs album with a big sun on it, you know. They knew how to exploit the sun and summer at Capitol Records already. And when the Beach Boys had All Summer Long, beautiful Modrian cover, subject matter of all the songs were things like going to the drive-in and spilling Coke on your girlfriend's dress and, you know, things like that.
Very cool.
Oh my gosh. About the song Cat on a Hot Foam Board, was this in the film? And is the song in reference to Mickey Dora?
You know, I'm not really sure because I haven't seen that particular film. But it was, you know, a play on Cat on a Hot Tin Roof, which was Elizabeth Taylor and Paul Newman, I believe, a great film of that era. And, you know, the guy in the film, Big Daddy, Burl Ives, right? The whole beatnik phrase, Big Daddy, came from Burl Ives' character in Cat on a Hot Tin Roof. So it was kind of considered a hip film because a lot of the young people at the time, you know, they were like Paul Newman. They didn't want to like do what, you know, go the way their father had gone, you know, and there was a lot of questioning in that film. So it was not really a counterculture film, but like for the kids it was because they identified with the young guy in the film. And Big Daddy was, you know, Big Daddy, the guy who laid down the thing. So the beatniks started calling themselves Big Daddy from that film. And Cat on a Hot Foam Board was just a rip from that. And I'm not sure if it had, I mean, Mickey ended up being in a lot of those early 60s movies. He's probably in that movie, but I don't think it's based on him at all.
Okay.
All right, I guess we have one last question here from David Arnson. We all know and admire Rick Griffin's contributions to the surf bands and magazines at the time. Are you aware of any other artists of note at that time?
Yeah, one of the guys, Mike Salisbury, who later did the Los Angeles Times Sunday Supplement graphic design for Los Angeles Times West magazine from, I think, 67 all the way to 72, and did graphic design for a number of album covers and companies. He even did, you know, Joe Camel later on, that scenario. But Mike Salisbury did the surfing maps in Surfer magazine, and he was really, really one of the best. Another guy came around in the mid to late 60s named Bill Ogden. He was from the Laguna Beach area, and he did incredible artwork. It's like Rick Griffin went to San Francisco and did psychedelic art for the San Francisco bands, but Bill Ogden was staying in Laguna Beach doing psychedelic surfing art, which is something that people should really look up. Bill Ogden, and you know, go online and look up Bill Ogden surf art or something like that on Google Images, and you'll see amazing things by Bill Ogden. And Mike Salisbury, you might want to put Mike Salisbury Surfer magazine to see what his stuff looked like. I mean, there were other good people, like just those are the ones that come to mind first as perhaps the best.
Amazing. I sense a lot of different wormholes that I'm going to find myself going down.
Oh, John Van Hammersveld. I could mention John Van Hammersveld, who did the Endless Summer poster, is a different kind of graphic artist from the cartoon graphic art. And John Severson, who published Surfer, was a fantastic artist too. Those John Severson, Rick Griffin, and John Van Hammersveld were all at Surfer at one time. And I think the appeal of those three artists, plus the content of the pictures of surfing, really, along with the music, helped people to identify with surfing so much in the early 60s. Surfing had a great graphic design look as well in those days, you know, better than later on. You know, later on it could be really ugly, bad new wave. But in the early 60s, it was a strong, impactful vision. And music kind of just went along with that. And that's what my book, Pop Surf Culture, is about. The real name of the book is Pop Surf Culture, Music, Design, Film, and Fashion from the Bohemian Surf Boom. And
where can people find that book?
Yes.
Right now, that book's out of print, but you might be able to find it on Amazon.com or eBay. Okay. And the prices are going up and down. Sometimes it's a little high, sometimes it's low, but just look up Pop Surf Culture by Domenic Priore and Brian Chittister. And that's, I mean, that book was well liked by like some of the guys, Steve Pesman from Surfer's Journal and Greg McGillivray from the 5 Summer Stories movie, they loved that book, and they thought it was humorous and a good, you know, upturning of some of the old hardcore surfness.
Awesome. And then of course they can always get The Riot on Sunset Strip on Amazon. I just got it too. So.
Yeah, that does cover some of the surfing music trend in it. It does a basic thumbnail of it, and eventually some of the other bands, as you saw, you know, became like the Turtles or the Beach Boys of the mid '60s, and Ever Present Fullness, and the guy Carl Radel ends up going in, you know, George Harrison's band and plays with Clapton and Derek and the Dominoes. I mean, there was a lot of really talented people in the South Bay. The Walker Brothers, the Standells. I mean, Dick Dodd was an amazing singer of '60s, one of the best '60s garage punk singers ever. So, yeah.
Awesome.
That's fantastic. I'll definitely, we have a past programming page on our website, so we'll definitely be able to link some of your fantastic publications, Domenic, because I know a lot of them are super local to, I mean, really local, absolutely local to the South Bay. We're going to have that playlist link. Oh my gosh, I have the link from Bill as well for music. We're going to have that SURFER'S Stomp instructional photo. Again, if somebody wants to do a video tutorial, we sent it over.
Oh
my
well,
gosh,
yeah.
so much stuff. And I don't see, oh, okay, here's a comment from Martha, actually, which I'm going to mention this just because I mentioned it last night in our practice run in Miracosta. Martha writes, we loved the sock hops, lunch break with all the surf music. My mom always talked about going to sock hops after football games because she graduated from Hawthorne High in '71, I want to say.
Well, sock hops, I actually witnessed one in 1963 briefly. The Beach Boys and Dick Dale played across the street from my house. My sister went to the show. I wasn't really allowed to go, but they let me walk in there and look at a little bit of it. And I saw the kids wearing kind of like the Madras, like this Madras shirt that I have on here. I can't see it, but kids mostly wore those like Madras shirts, and they were very casual compared to like, you had to wear, you know, nice clothes. You couldn't wear, you know, messed up clothes in the early '60s, but still for nice clothes, people dressed a little bit more casual than they would have on the East Coast. And they were always done in basketball gyms because people would take off their shoes and they would dance around in their socks because you'd slide around better on your socks and ruin the basketball floor with your dress shoes. You know what I mean? So yeah, I saw one of those, and the Beach Boys and the Dick Dale were the bands. So, I mean, I only caught the vibe. I can't tell you what the Beach Boys played or anything like that, but I wasn't even in there the whole time, but I did get to see what the teenagers at a sock hop looked like in '63.
Well, we've had a couple people say they'd love to hear more. We'd love to have you expound more on your Beach Boys and Smile experiences. So maybe we'll have you back to do a talk specifically on that sometime.
Oh, sure. Smile is one of my favorite subjects.
Yeah, that'd be great. And Jamie, maybe we need to plan when things settle down and we're able to do things in person. Maybe our next gala could be a sock hop with all
my
the
gosh,
music. Wouldn't that be fun?
That would be so much fun. Oh my gosh. Well, I would definitely be there, especially if I don't have to wear a heeled shoe. I'm always down. I was
yeah, me too.
I was happy at the last gala because I totally snuck in with some Converse on for our 1980s. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The 80s prom.
The Converse is made for dancing.
Yes. Well, they've been a uniform for me since I was a small child. So.
Official shoe of the Ramones.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, this has been awesome. So much fun. Okay, if anybody thinks of any other questions, please go ahead and email us at the museum. We'll get you in touch with Domenic, or we'll reach out to him for you. Check back on our website for all of the information that you want to follow up on. We're going to put a recording up tonight, so it's available tomorrow morning. So if you also want to hear that radio interview, you'll want to check that out. I'll also link it on the website as well, because there's some really fantastic stuff in there, and Hermosa gets a shout out, which is often, you know, doesn't always happen, but it's always great when it does. And yeah, and if you guys would like to support the museum, we love being able to continue doing this programming, and we want to keep it up as a resource to all the folks in our community and abroad. Please head on over to our website, give us a high five, $5. Hey, seriously, you know, every cent counts. And thank you so much, Domenic, for a
Thank you so much, Domenic.
Thank you.
Fantastic.
And thank you, Michelle, for being the best like DJ co-host.
Got it.
Fantastic.
Thanks, Jamie.
Yeah, thank you everybody for coming tonight, and we will see you around online, okay?
All right, take care.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.